So, why is archaeology important? What is it for? Why should we even care? Bold questions indeed. But since when have the prehistory guys been afraid of opening a can of worms?
Never.
What do you think, Rupert?
Well, it's an important question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, is it an academic question? Is it a scientific question? Is it a philosophical question? There's so many angles that you could take on this, but understanding the human past is something we've always been humans. We've always been fascinated with the past.
Yeah.
And then you could take the flip side of it and say, well, where would the international tourist industry be without archaeology? Because I think that's an important point as well.
Well, I think you've hit on a very important point, actually very early on, that there's a huge demand for it. Interesting stuff, though. Archaeology is pretty huge. It's not the biggest industry in the world by a long stretch, but it's a lot bigger than people realise, and a lot of money and resources and stuff go into it, from heritage management, through to the academic aspect of it, which is, I suppose, what most of our minds go to when we think in terms of archaeology. We tend to think in terms of the academic aspect of it. And people writing papers and it being a science and stuff. So, I found out there are approximately 7,000 archaeologists in the UK. Guess how many archaeologists there are in the US of A?
Ooh, do you know what? I couldn't even give it a guess. Go on.
7,000.
Wow.
Which is a per capita sort of pro rata ratio, is about a fifth of what you'd expect. It's interesting. I don't have figures for Europe and the rest of the world, though, unfortunately. Yeah,
that's interesting. It has to be said that we have got an awful lot to dig for here.
True.
We've got a much richer past, I suppose, than the United States. But that is, nevertheless,
that's a can of worms.
It is.
Yeah.
That's true. It is a can of worms. But, stuff that is markedly different. There's some phenomenal sites in the States that are going to yield all sorts of artifacts of, whether it's flint tools or what have you. Obviously, I'm talking about significantly prehistoric archaeology, not the last 1,000 years. Whereas, when you get into megalithic culture over in the East, so Europe and going east, then there's an awful lot of stuff that is much older culturally. So, but
I don't think there's any less in terms of human archaeology and the human story is concerned in the US. That would be
that's not what I meant.
I was hoping that's what. The point I'm trying to make is, there's a lot of time and energy devoted to digging in the earth, putting a trowel in the ground, so that we can extract stuff. And the question is, why do we do that? I did a little bit of a sort of mooch around before we pressed record.
Yes.
And ask both the public and professionals alike what archaeology is for, and it comes back every time. It basically comes out as this: so we can look at the past so that we can avoid making mistakes in the future. And
yes, ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the basis of this conversation will be me saying that is actually BS, and we need to be honest about it.
Yeah. It is the human condition, isn't it, that we do not learn from the past. Just historically, you look at us, we haven't changed one jot in however many thousand years. We've just designed better ways of killing each other. That's essentially the predominant difference.
without sounding at all cynical or,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But archaeology as a whole, I think one of the things that so the impression that is taken, if you like, by the public at large, seems to be that we dig up these isolated things, we find these isolated things, and everything that we find is significant in some way. Whether it's the extremes of the pyramids or any of the major burials that we've excavated throughout, from Eastern Europe and coming into Britain, we lose sight of the fact that there have been millions of people who have lived over the last, say, 10,000 years. We don't need to go back further than that for the sake of argument. All these millions of people who have lived, and they've all left something in their wake, whether it's a flint tool or it doesn't matter what it is. Every single one of them will have left something. So, right under your feet, wherever you are, there's always going to be something that you could be found if you dug down to it. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. There is so much of the past that is eternally under our feet wherever we are. And I think that's missing in people's overall perceptions. Do you agree with that?
Well, I can't disagree with that, in the basic facts of that. But what is it that drives us to look into the past? What, has people take up the career of being an archaeologist at what level, whatever level that they choose? What has governments fund to quite an extensive degree the undertakings of archaeology? Why is it that there is legislation in the books that prevents major developments occurring, roadworks, building works, whatever, without the archaeologists getting in there first to preserve whatever may be in the ground? That is the sort of fundamental of the question I think we're trying to answer. And the answer I've given that most people give is actually mistaken. It's a mistake. It's a wonderful ideal and a laudable thing to be looking back in order to look forward. But in practice, it's not actually what's happening. Because
but don't you think that that's another aspect of the human condition, though, that we're very good at ideals, so we come up with these glorious notions of ideals, and then we never live up to them in any way, shape, or form. No, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you just have to look at the last few hundred years of people's fascination with the past, the people that we really know about. So the early prehistorians, whether it will be people like Aubrey or Stukely, or whoever, it doesn't matter. But clearly the fascination has always been there. Even our, what we've learned about our prehistoric ancestors, that they had a relationship with their ancestors, even if it was just a cerebral one, that it's a conceptual thing of having a relationship with your deep past. And it's just something that is so deeply ingrained within us, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think that's the point that, we're probably going to work our way around to. And yeah, as you say, that it is far more fundamental to our being than we'd like to recognize. And that part of our unconscious, conscious, and whatever, regards that as slightly frivolous, as unimportant, that we have to invent this elevated status for archaeology so that it has some depth to it that isn't really there. I mean,
do you think that's true? I mean,
yeah.
Go on. Sorry, go on. I'm interrupting you.
I was going to say, it's all very well stating that there's this body of knowledge that if we look at, then we'll learn from the past and be able to be better people in the future. But where is the literature that bridges that gap? Who are the people in archaeology, for instance, who are, writing from that point of view and delivering that information to us, the public, or more pertinently, to those that lead us, supposedly? Or to put it the other way around, which leaders are reading archaeology in order to avoid World War III?
Yes.
Just to put it, it's extremes. And like I say, the ideal is laudable, but where is it? There's huge gap. There is no bridge of communication that enables that.
No, it's... well, we don't need to get into the political thing of...
no, let's not do that.
I always quote Mark Twain. Samuel Langhorne Clements, who said that anyone prepared to stand for president should be automatically barred from doing so. And I think that applies across the board, really. So you couldn't expect anybody who sits in a presidential position, they're not going to be remotely interested in learning the lessons of the past, I don't think. But where do we draw the line in that we have no issue with learning history, for example? We see an importance in understanding everything that's been recorded.
Yeah.
Whether it's knowing your monarchs or it doesn't matter. And so why should prehistory warrant any less understanding than history? Clearly it shouldn't. In fact, if anything, it underlies the fact that we just don't learn the lessons from the past. If you can show in prehistory that they were just doing exactly the same things as we were 500 years ago or fewer. So, yes, it's not about learning from the past, as you say.
Yeah. I mean, that said, there are people like Yuval Noah Harari who do write in that space. But I still wonder whether the right people pay attention or not, or even whether Yuval Noah Harari, for instance, is actually on the right track with some of the things that, the basis of the writings that he does.
I paraphrase because I don't remember the exact quote, but and I can't remember who said it either. But it was that people who don't study the past are fated to carry out the same mistakes of the past, and those that do study the past are fated to just watch everybody else carrying out the mistakes of the past. And I think there is some truth in that essentially we're animals that run on all our baser instincts when it comes down to it. We just grandiose our reasons for doing them. So, so whether it's global warfare that essentially is all rooted in animal territorialism, and we give all these noble reasons for it. You've only got to look at the shabbiest parts of history, where the Crusades, for example. What an abhorrent period of history that we make these ridiculous reasons for going off and killing people somewhere else in the world. It's just territorialism. It's no different from wombats fighting about a hole in the ground.
Here's an analogy that either works or doesn't. Since when has knowing how to lose weight helped you lose weight?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, isn't it?
You actually have to do something different. The knowledge is useless unless it's applied, and that's rather the thing. And also the thing is, things happen in history. The common denominator is the presence of human beings. It's all very well looking at the past and saying, that happened because. But those set of circumstances are not going to happen again. Stuff that happens now happens because of a certain set of circumstances that are very, very special and particular to now. You throw human beings into the mix, boom, you're pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's let's not talk about whether or not it's effective in that realm anymore. I think we've laid that.
No,
even though people will profess that is the reason for archaeology.
You know
I'm going to say the reason for archaeology is fun and having a good story to tell. Discuss.
Oh, I wouldn't argue with that. Do you know what? I think aside from the deeper aspect that there is something really profound about interacting with the past in a very tangible way. So whether that's holding something in your hands that might be 5,000 years old, and especially if you've just dug it up out the ground and you know that, well, you're the first person to hold that since the person who was using it held that however many thousand years ago, or standing in the same space as somebody would have been however many thousand years ago. All that is very profound. But I'm also struck by the amount of archaeologists we've spoken to who have almost decided that that's what they're going to do from a very, very young age. And some of the great archaeologists who were involved in digs when they were kids, and it just never went away. And one of the funniest ones was our good friend Kath Walker, who, when she was about 6 years old, it didn't matter what it was that she dug up in the garden. She'd put it in a plastic bag, and it was like she was playing archaeology from when she was tiny. It's intriguing, really intriguing. What is it that is just buried away in there that
and I love
never goes away?
The thing, that so many years ago, Channel 4 took the bold step of producing a time team in the UK. I mean, somebody had a vague idea that it could be successful, but I don't think anybody would have predicted how successful a time team would be, and how deeply ingrained that sense of digging a hole and with the hope of discovering something you didn't, or finding something that you didn't have before, or discovering something you didn't know before. It seems so fundamental to so many of us, and I think when we're honest, that's the need that is fed by archaeology. It's a cultural underpinning of that desire to know who you are and where you've come from. It's a much more personal thing, I think, that is not given enough true weight when we ask the question about what is archaeology for. It's a kind of sustenance. And I tell you what, there's another aspect that underpins this. Do you know one of the first things that certainly in the modern day, and certainly I think in the past, is when there's been wars and there have been invading armies, etc., invading forces. One of the first orders is to deculturalize. It's one of the most brutal aspects of deculturalizing of the people that you're invading, so that you take away their sense of belonging, their sense of existence. For example, so say somebody invaded the UK. I think in that line of, in order to take away people's spirit, bombing Stonehenge out of existence would be probably a good place to start. Not, amongst many. Do you see what I mean?
I do see what you mean. I agree with you. I think that it's you only have to look at, in more recent years, at when ISIS were destroying museum artifacts.
Yeah.
Erase the trace of the people you're seeking to vanquish, and I think we've done that. Sometimes we've done that. Historically and prehistorically, we've done that, in the use of religion, for example. That how you would have had your earlier gods and goddesses who Christianity would come in and say, yeah, but you're using because if they couldn't actually defeat the faith of these people, then they would say, well, you're using the wrong names. This is actually Mary. Your fertility goddess is Mary, and so you're still eradicating the traces of the culture, subsuming them.
Yeah. So I believe that archaeology is fundamentally, feeding our cultural and personal identities.
Do you know that there's another aspect as well that. And I don't think we tend to recognise what we're doing a lot of the time. That if you look at what people choose to buy to decorate their homes, so we will buy modern reproductions of old things because, whether it's old style of lighting or old style of furniture, because we still have these notions of the past being something romantic. You talk to a lot of people who, you say to them, if you could go to anywhere in history, or you could go to any time period, future or past, where would you go? And so many people talk about the past as if it was this romantic, idyllic place before we had all the stresses of today.
Yeah.
And it's such an extraordinary concept, really, when you think how dreadful so much of the past would have been, whether it was the inability to cure your toothache, or the fact that everything stank, or the fact that you could go and club somebody around the head with a piece of rock and there'd be no consequences, or whether it's blood sports left, right, and centre. That there's something about that we have this romantic notion of the past that is deeply embedded within us. Why that should be, I don't know.
It's also, I'm thinking back to when I was on Orkney, on the dig on the Cairns Broch, and I remember at the time finding out that it was a fact that there in the Iron Age they were keeping in niches, around the walls and their rocks, relics from the Neolithic. They'd come across the odd axe head and stuff and stuff like that, and preserve it and have it as a heritage heirloom, from way back when, because they would have archaeology, in inverted commas, especially on Orkney, lying about in the Iron Age and being as fascinated then. That was an interesting sort of little bit of an eye-opener for me, that the past was venerated in those similar kinds of ways. So, all right, I think it would come round to the thing that it's not a tool for for helping us really project our future, noble though that idea is. It is really about satisfying something fundamental in us, and supporting individual, cultural, national identities at root. And I think we can be honest about that. That is certainly a noble ambition, don't you think?
Well,
in and of itself,
I do. I think there is, regardless of how we might be failing to learn from the past. I think that there is always that aspect of knowing who we were helps us to understand who we are. I do think that's a thing.
Yeah. And as long as you can enrich individuals, as long as you can enrich nations, as long as you can enrich humanity, by, illuminating who they are, where they come from, job's a good one. You don't need to justify it on any other grounds, really. And as long as people enjoy it, it gives them satisfaction. I'd say carry on carrying on.
I couldn't agree more.
We'd love to hear what your opinions on the subject are, folks. So, please do leave comments and all.
Do.
Yeah, we may be looking at it from a very myopic point of view. Who knows? Views from the other side or views from another perspective are always fascinating to hear from. So with that, I think it's time to say thank you for listening, folks. And we'll look forward to the next time. Do have a look around the rest of the channel. Do consider supporting us on Patreon. And also have a look at a Buy Me a Coffee campaign where we're saving up to make an extraordinary film. You'll find out more there if you click down below. So that's it. Ta-ra from me and
ta-ra from me. We'll see you again soon.
Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.